Structural competency defined by upstream determinants of health in Westside Charleston. We've spent the past few months examining and discussing a multitude of environmental, cultural, and historical factors that greatly impact the health of individuals and communities. Our society, healthcare system, and government currently address issues from the bottom-up perspective, treating disease primarily through a medical lens rather than addressing the lifestyle causes of disease that are shaped by the environment and policy. Although the medical approach to treatment is essential and should be maintained, much more progress can be made towards the effective and successful treatment and prevention by increasing our understanding of the non-medical determinants of health, how they've been shaped by history, and future directions that can be taken to address such issues. The few lectures that we've had on this topic have been extremely eye-opening and impactful in my perspective, not only as a future healthcare provider, but also as a community member. I was truly shocked by much of the history we learned throughout the sessions, especially the information specific to Charleston, West Virginia, that was shared with us by Pastor Watts. Pastor Watts also spoke with my group about personal healthcare experiences he'd had as an African American male, which seems rather discriminatory and neglectful to the point of being life-threatening. He even mentioned that it did seem that the poor treatment he received seemed to be a result of implicit bias. It was unintentional. However, the consequences of such are still just as detrimental and severe as those resulting from explicit discrimination based on race. This discussion specifically helped me to understand the mindset that many African Americans and other minorities possess in regards to seeking medical attention and what I can do differently as a future provider.
I would just like to say that the history that we've learned throughout the last couple of weeks with this project has been very different from the history that we've been taught. And I think that is one thing that we're all ignorant to that history. We don't know that history. So if we all are aware of that history, then it becomes a common ground that we can have to start to work together to right these wrongs.
In one of our earlier sessions on Zoom, I remember when we talked about the redlining, I actually called home and I was telling my mom about that, and I was like, I never knew that was one of the reasons that a lot of African Americans ended up in the same communities together, segregated. I mean, we all knew about Jim Crow laws and segregation laws, but whenever those were illegalized, we came up with new ways of segregating, such as the redlining policies. So I think, that was one of I was really surprised by that, and I actually called home and told my mom about that. So I think other people knowing that, I think everyone should know things like that, because I think it really does take a lot of the stigma away from how we see certain communities that have higher rates of crime, and how that rate of crime is associated with race.
He kind of stated how in our small group, we really talked about how there weren't a lot of businesses coming into the West Side, and how it felt like the West Side was getting unfairly neglected based on how Charleston was allotting their money coming in from taxes. It seemed like a lot of the money was going into the downtown area and how the West Side was kind of getting neglected. And we saw that when we went on the tour of the community of how the housing was older, it may not have been as safe as some of the other areas that you could live in Charleston, which could pose some health risk to the people that live there, including children and stuff like that. I know we passed the elementary school while we were on the tour, and I kind of talked about how it was kind of weird. We were just walking through the community. We saw this one school, and you didn't really see a lot of anything else for the children to do outside, to nurture this learning environment in the community or anything like that. And it seemed like they didn't really have as many opportunities as they would in other places. Where I grew up, we had several parks that we could go and play. We had one in town itself that had a playground just for us to go there. There were several other ones all through the community that we could go to. We felt safe there. They had the equipment that we could play on. They had sports equipment that we could use to practice with. And so when I went to the West Side, I was kind of thinking maybe I could see something similar to that, but just the lack of. Not really the lack of, but they didn't really have maybe the funding or the space available to provide these facilities or any of these opportunities to the children in the community. I think as everyone that has kind of spoken about how it was clear when we were doing the tour that a lot of the buildings and the schools, The structure wasn't there as far as feeling safe and adequate, but I still felt like there was a sense of community. There was a church that said literally on the sign, usually it says, join us on Sundays or have a good Thanksgiving, but it said, pray for our community. So that's something that I usually don't see unless it's a community that really needs prayer. But there's still this strong sense of a family, and being in Richmond is not. I mean, it's like that, but we're not at all on the same team like I felt like it was in Charleston. We learned that day some of the history of the West Side, and especially positions of authority being the problem in that community. So if you have some police who are very much like the authority figures who are not trusted coming in and trying to get things done, the community is not really going to work with them. And in many cases, it could worsen the problem.